So, my name's Rob, and it's a real pleasure. This is the first time at a Rotary Club meeting for me, and I was just learning about all the amazing things you do. It's rare to have this few people in a room doing this much stuff, and that is a really impressive takeaway so far. Normally what I do when I do any kind of talk like this is just kind of try to get a sense of the room. And one of the good ways, I mean, you already know each other, but maybe you don't know some aspects of one another's backgrounds. And so one of the fun things I like to do is ask people about a story of their name. And it helps me remember your name, but it also might help other people know where you're coming from. So my name's Robb Barnes. I've been misspelling, my name's Robert, I've been misspelling it with 2 B's since grade 7 or something like that. So that's my first name. And my last name, Barnes, is actually of English origin, and it means one who lives next to a barn. So very, very illustrious history of living next to a barn. So that's the story of my name. And why don't we move down the road here to Keith?
Oh, I'm not sure if there's a story. Well, my dad gave me my name, and he got it from a newscaster in the Philippines. Her name was June Keithley. So that's where my dad got my name.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, my name's Edward Wright Bellman. My great something grandfather was Philemon Wright, was the first settler in this Ottawa area, and I guess I don't know if I was named after my mother or something, but my mother's father died before she was born. His name was William Edward, so they called her Willa Edwarda, and I guess I got the Edward somewhere.
And then people called you Ted, right?
Yeah, well, it's just a...
So I don't know if everybody knows my real first name is Eduardo. So way back during our time, the time I was born, in every house, or maybe most of the houses in the Philippines, they have this calendar wherein there's some name on each calendar, and it's a practice that if you're born on that particular day, the name on that calendar will be your name. So that's why I was called, my name is Eduardo. And also it's very common in the Philippines that you got the traditional Eduardo as your real name, so it sounds more Spanish. But because Philippines is more like Spanish and Americanized in some ways, so there will be a American nickname. So that's why my name is Eddie as well. So that's the name. Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you for coming up with an idea. Now we are going to reveal some of the secrets that we may or may not want to. Robert, thank you. My name is Dinakar Vaidya, and Dinakar means son. And the Vaidya, the last name is not actually the last name came from the great-great-grandparents. It was a different last name. But my great-grandfather at his time, I'm from Nepal, so we didn't have lots of modern doctors and nurses at the time. So at a time when, people need to take care of the sick people, they do, all different ways of meditating or taking care of it. And my great-grandfather went to learn some medicines in India, and the one who treats the sick people called Vaidya. And he adopted that as a last name, became my last name. For some reason, I did not go into the medicines. I ended up in financials there.
Interesting. My name's Miriam Eileen Fraser. My mother was encouraged by her cousin to go out on a date with my father, and she finally said yes because she couldn't stand listening to her cousin. So they went on a blind date, and the cousin's name was Miriam Dawn Klein. So they named me Miriam after Dawn. She never used Miriam at all. And my middle name is after my great aunt, who was my mother's sort of favorite uncle's wife, and she met my great uncle when she was coming from Ireland during the First World War on a boat with her father to move to Canada. And Uncle Roy, my great uncle, was coming back from the war to take more training. He was a doctor. He came back and trained and went back to war and then came back to Canada and had kept up a correspondence. He had gone to meet her family in Ireland and they got married. And so I'm Eileen after Aunt Eileen.
Oh, John Douglas Fullerton. Middle names from my father. And John, I don't know, they just picked it.
That's it. Well, when you asked the question, I can only think of the 60s when the pill was the rage, so I became Lil the Pill. I was a pain in the ass.
They'll remember you.
Mo proper name is Maurice Vacheresse. Vacheresse French, 15th century France somewhere around Bordeaux. They migrated to England in the 16th century, and that's where they lost their French. Maurice is actually, my dad was a Habs fan. I was named after the Rocket.
Oh.
My name apparently was supposed to be Ruth, but somehow my name's Linda Ann Newton, and it got changed to Linda because Linda was a very common name back in the early 60s. But apparently now it's very interesting now because it gets lots of comments on with our Spanish friends and Brazilian friends, because Linda in Spanish and Brazilian obviously means the pretty one, the beautiful one.
Well, I'm not sure. Just a name for me. So, but what I believe, what I was told is I was named after my brother's friend at school. My name is Omar, by the way. And yeah, that's the whole story.
I'm Susan Marie Kohler. The Susan they picked because they liked. Marie is my aunt. And Kohler is a Czechoslovakian background. Although I was born in Canada, so were my parents. But if I lived in Czechoslovakia right now, my name would be Kolajova, not Kolaj, not Kohler. Because the women always had the OVA on the end. So.
Well, Susan Hopkinson. The Hopkinson is English, and it's another name like yours, which has a meaning. The core name is Hobbs, and then it has suffixes. Hobbs kin means the kin of Hobbs, and then Hobbs kin's son means the son of the kin of Hobbs, and it's just changed to Hopkinson. And I'm named Susan, but I was supposed to be named Lindors after my great-grandmother, but my parents didn't want to name me Lindors, so they just picked Susan.
I'm Robert James Hillier. I have no idea where my parents picked my name from, but I know when I was 15, I picked my own name because I didn't like Robert. I picked Bob. And the cool thing about Bob is it's spelled the same way backwards as it is forward, which a lot of people have that claim, but it's also spelled the same way in a mirror.
If you spell my name backwards, it's Boar. For you. Maybe I'll just talk a little bit about how I got to here, and part of it was Keith phoned me up and invited me. But I grew up not too far from here at Pinecrest Road, just down the street. I went to high school at Notre Dame High School. So I grew up in Ottawa. I was working in the dishwasher at Mexicali Roses back when that existed for years, and as a cook too. And you know, if you'd asked me when I was growing up if I cared about the environment, I would have said sure. I think everyone does to some extent. But it wasn't something that was really top of mind. It wasn't something that inspired me to get involved. And it was only really when I was living in Toronto with my eventually to be wife. And we were, it was one of those periods of underemployment, which is sometimes very, very useful. You know, you get to read a lot when you're underemployed. And so I was between jobs, and I was between degrees, and I was just kind of thinking a lot, reading a lot, and it was the 2008, 2007 time, and that's when movies like The Inconvenient Truth were coming out, and I was starting to see people like Elizabeth May pop up on debates and start talking about climate change in a way that I hadn't heard people talk about it before. And it got me to start reading about some of the issues. And this one book really kind of changed my life. It's called A Short History of Progress by Ronald Wright. So there's the right name again. And Ronald Wright basically looks at kind of the history of humanity, and it looks at he characterizes something that he calls a progress trap, where what we tend to do, one of the things that he tends to notice is that we tend to invent something that makes life a lot easier, like dramatically easier, orders of magnitude easier, or more efficient. And then we tend to use that almost to the point where we don't realize it at the time, but it creates problems for us down the road. And so you might think of one example, one harsh example is a nuclear bomb is a much more efficient killing machine than any device that came before it. But of course there are all these consequences associated with nuclear armaments. And similarly with climate change, it's one of those things that you can slowly step into as a civilization without realizing what's going into making that problem and basically how to get out of it once you're in it. And so that really changed the way I started looking at issues, and it really drew me to the environment as something that I thought was a mounting problem in our lifetime. And so what I did is I phoned up Sierra Club Canada and basically moved back to Ottawa, and I did an internship with them. And then I got a master's degree in public policy and focused a lot on ecological economics, kind of the intersection again of urban planning and economics. And a lot of those subjects that really have an environmental angle, but it's a lens that we've only started to analyze them with. And from there, I jumped to an international nonprofit called Climate Action Network Canada, where I was at UN delegations and UN conferences. And then eventually, I found my home at a local level organization that really focuses on making Ottawa a more livable, healthy, and sustainable city. And so it ties my passion for the city of Ottawa, where I grew up, the city that I love, with an issue that I think is very important. So that's why I'm here today, besides the fact that Keithy was kind enough to invite me. And so thank you very much for having me here and listening to my little spiel, which is about Ecology Ottawa, but more generally about the stuff that's going on in our backyard. And talking to Bob about what the Rotary Club does was a perfect example of a bunch of people doing amazing work, and sometimes it flies right under the radar. And with Ecology Ottawa, sometimes we're right in your own, we're right in your backyard, we're knocking on your doors, we're in your neighborhood, we're planting trees, we're doing all these things, but people don't always know about it. So it's a great chance to exchange that way. And so what I want to do is maybe talk a little bit about our campaigns, and just this is where the slideshow comes in, and it's just a bunch of pictures that'll hopefully guide you through what we're doing. At Ecology Ottawa, maybe I should back up a bit and just tell you a bit about the history of the organization. It started in 2008 in January, and the idea was that it was really, in many ways, a reaction to all of the other environmental organizations out there. And it wasn't a negative reaction, it was just an idea of, let's do something a little bit different here. A lot of environmental organizations are really good at what we call the AIR campaign, or the AIR game. And so that's Sierra Club Canada, Climate Action Network Canada, and all these great groups going out there and essentially having these conversations of elite to elite. So it's someone who becomes an expert in an area. Let's say I know a lot about greenhouse gas emissions and energy efficiency of homes, and then essentially lobbies to make specific policy changes at a very high level. So, lobby Queen's Park or lobby Parliament Hill, and go in and have that conversation, expert to expert, or expert to politician who can make a difference, and have that kind of conversation. And that's a really important thing to do, the AIR campaign. But there's more to it than that, we think. And so at Ecology Ottawa, our theory of change is a little bit different. We think that the city of Ottawa and the world community will only become more engaged with the environment if we get to the point where we're developing what we call a mobilized constituency of people who care across the city. So at Ecology Ottawa, we are confident that hundreds of thousands of people across the city share our basic values. They want a clean city, they want a healthy city, they want a future for their children and grandchildren, a viable one. And what we need to do is talk to them and find out, that they do. And so they're waiting to get engaged. And in many ways, I see parallels with the Rotary Club. There's this appetite for getting engaged, And it's really up to groups like Ecology Ottawa or groups like the Rotary Club to tap into that engagement and to go, in our case, we go door to door and house to house, and we talk to people and say, do you want to get involved in some way? Is there something, do you want to get involved with tree planting or get involved with cleaning up this stream or something like that? And so essentially we see that as being our key. And so instead of talking from elite to elite, what we try to do is get a groundswell of what they call grassroots support up. And so that influences the policy in a way that a phone call from an expert might not be able to. We think we need both, obviously. We think both are really important. But we, at Ecology Ottawa, we focus a lot on what we call grassroots organizing and going door to door. So maybe I'll talk to you a little bit about our three big campaigns. And lately, you won't find this on the website, but lately we've decided that we're going to call them three flashy, fancy things, because it was really hard to remember 5 or 6 campaigns before. We were always like forgetting halfway through our speech what the 5 campaigns were. Right now we have 3 campaigns. We call them Living City, Active City, and Renewable City. And I'll go through each of them in turn and just maybe give you a bit of background as to what we're doing, why we're doing it. And so I'll start with Living City. Yeah. And please, at any point, if anyone has any questions, just jump in. Or we can save them to the end. That's equally fine. So, Living City. You might intuit what Living City is about. Living City is about our green space. It's about our trees. It's about our water. It's about our living fabric. It's about our relationships with the other species that are wandering around in our city and right outside of our city. And so, and it's about all of that. But right now the focus is primarily on planting 1 million trees in Ottawa by Canada's 150th birthday, which is 2017. So the reason for this is that we're seeing massive tree cover loss. We've seen things like this before with the Dutch elm disease. But what we're seeing right now is the impact of something called the emerald ash borer, which is chewing through all the ash trees in Ottawa, and we have a lot of ash trees in Ottawa. And so we're slated to lose millions of trees over the next few years in Ottawa. And you'll see, if you walk anywhere in the city, you'll see trees marked with a big X. And it's possible to inoculate them to a certain extent. But in terms of the most effective way of counteracting the impact of the emerald ash borer, the thinking is that it's to plant a lot of trees.
Rob?
Yes?
One of the questions that came up this week at our house was, with all of this happening, did they not foresee this coming? And what are they doing to arrest the demise of our maple trees, which would be disastrous beyond because of the maple syrup? So what are they doing to prevent any of this stuff from coming? Are they?
That's a question that is in many ways above my pay grade. What I would like to do after the talk, if it works for you, is I can put you in touch with Velta, who is our Living City organizer, and she lives and breathes trees, and she has all the answers. And if I were to give you an answer, it would just be wrong.
Then another one that I'm going to ask is, with the ash borer, have they taken seeds from the good trees and put them in a bank for future reintroduction? Because once they go, they go. Yeah. But are they preserving some good seeds for future planting once this ash borer has died?
I think the Arboretum is.
Finland has seeds.
Yeah, I don't have
the
answer
know that.
in terms
Okay.
of what Ottawa's doing, but
Okay.
another one for Velta.
Okay.
So yeah, Living City's primarily focused on this on the trees. But as grassroots organizers, what we're thinking of is not purely the idea of planting 1 million trees. We think that's great. But it's also about engaging neighborhoods in the idea of planting 1 million trees. And so the idea of rallying around the parks that they think of as valuable, and the idea of caring about their neighborhoods and getting their hands dirty, so to speak. And so that's really the engagement piece there is we're going out community to community and saying, hey, so recently we were in Orleans saying, hey, it looks like Convent Glen, there's parks around Convent Glen that have just been devastated, and bringing communities together by going door to door and saying, do you want to start doing a planting? Do you want to start organizing something? And eventually the idea is that we can develop people, a network of people who care about this issue. and are willing to take
So
action.
do you go in physically door to door to the community associations and work that way?
We do both. But our philosophy, and my executive director, the way he phrased it is we like to talk to people whose opinions we don't already know. So it's one thing for me as an environmentalist to go to the bridgehead downtown and say, hey, you agree with me? And find that like 95% of the people in the room agree with me on most things, and that's great. But it's another thing to go into communities, especially ones that might not expect someone to knock on their door and say, would you like to get engaged in an environmental issue? And often, and actually just as often, if not more often, the answer is absolutely yes. So it's not so much a question of where people are positioned geographically or demographically. In fact, I'd say the most active volunteer base at Ecology Ottawa tends to be retired or semi-retired people. But it's a question of engagement and having that chance. So yeah, we try everything. we're always trying to engage people, whatever the means. So community associations is definitely one of the means. So there is Mayor Watson planting a tree along with the FIFA owl. I was speaking at Woodruff High School today, and there was much confusion as to what the thing was in the top right. That is a FIFA owl who was there for the women's soccer tournament. I guess I have 15 minutes, right? We're done by 8?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll make sure that we go through this in time. And so planting trees, and so that's part of the campaign. And of course, it also touches on water. Someone mentioned the 1960s, the song "Paved Paradise" to put up a parking lot. We have a project that's called Paved Paradise, where we basically go in, and these are usually schools where they've just they have asphalt everywhere, and they want to dig it up, and they want to turn it into a garden or something like that, and all the kids get involved, and so we've done that 2 summers in a row, and we're hoping to do it in a third year. So that's another kind of engagement project, and it does involve members from across the community. And of course, the Living City in the past, one of our biggest successes at Ecology Ottawa is work on the Ottawa River. For years, what we saw was inadequate infrastructure to process the mixture of stormwater and wastewater whenever we had a large rainfall. So whenever we had a large rainfall, it would overburden the system, and you'd have this outflow of essentially sewage mixed in with rainwater. And so you'd have something looking like that. This is not a picture from Ottawa, but you can imagine that something similar was happening. And we actually recently got all 3 levels of government to come together to commit to funding for that infrastructure so we can fix it up and make sure that there are more days in which people can swim in Westboro Beach or whatever beach, and people can enjoy the water more often without those high E. coli counts. And also it's just healthier for everyone down the road, all the way down to St. Lawrence and out into the Atlantic, because we know that everything that we do here affects communities all down the line. So this one, when I was at Woodruff High School today, I was asking people, what is this? What is this picture of? And it's a picture of air. So it's the hardest answer if I were to ask you. And it's really to symbolize our climate change campaign. Renewable City is about climate change and the move to renewable energy. And we're working on a number of things there right now. But one of the main things is the move towards a renewable vision for the city. We were really happy that the city unveiled what they called an Air Quality and Climate Change Management Plan in 2014, which is basically a whole set of actions to try to move Ottawa in a direction that a lot of other cities are going in now. And Vancouver is a great example of a jurisdiction that's just leading the way. They're trying to go 100% renewable by 2050, and Ottawa is now starting to talk about that kind of a transition. So that's another campaign we have. And this is, of course, this is a shot of Toronto after those storms the other day, just in terms of what we're concerned about in terms of climate change. But I've already talked a little bit about that. Our third campaign is called Active City. And so Active City primarily is focused on something called a complete street, or complete streets development. And a complete street is a street designed for all ages, users, and abilities. And in fact, Sherbourne Road is just behind here. It's just over there. And we just finished doing a street audit of Sherbourne Road. And street audits are something we do a lot of. The reason we did a street audit of Sherbourne Road is because parents were saying to schools further east instead of further west. And it was literally just a question of moving a few blocks in one direction as opposed to another. But you know, when you're a kid and you're a parent and you're trying to let your kid cross the street, you're pretty worried, right? Sherburne only has sidewalks on one side. Cars were kind of racing around. There was water pooling in different areas. It was tough to get around by bike and everything else. So they asked Ecology Ottawa if we'd come in and do an audit of the street. And here is not a financial audit. What we're doing is we're literally walking up and down the street and seeing what measurable, tangible changes could be made to the street, because we know that it's up for resurfacing. So when they do resurface it, what can they do to make it more amenable to all ages, users, and abilities? What can they do to make it more amenable to pedestrians? And often they have what they call the 8 to 80 rule. So people as young as 8 or as old as 80, how do people in wheelchairs access this space? And so that's currently underway, but that's just an example of the kind of direct outreach we do with communities around our Active City campaign. The audits are a really big piece. And so this is kind of, we're only starting now in Ottawa to see what complete streets would look like. It's just starting. Churchill down the street is an example.
I have a question regarding the street audit that you are conducting. Is that based on a specific framework or standard?
So there's no standard, and there's no it's not ISO approved or anything like that. It's really, it depends on the needs of the community associations. It's usually driven by community associations, and the audit can be as elaborate or as simple as required by the discussions. And so no, it doesn't. When we plop these on the desks of councillors, it's not as if they're all part of the same framework. So they do differ. We recently completed a really big audit with the Council on Aging, and that was a 44-page behemoth with charts and a lot of quantitative analysis and some qualitative analysis and some graphs and everything else. The one on Sherburne is a much more stripped down, we walked the street, here's what we found, and really filtered through the lens of Complete Streets principles and the Complete Streets policy, which was brought out by the City of Ottawa, which basically says that as a matter of policy, they'll look at street rebuilds with the Complete Streets lens in mind, all ages, users, and abilities.
Thank you.
Oh, and so Main Street is another example of a street that's about to be finished. And then we've also focused in the past on light rail, but right now that's very much, that ship has sailed, so to speak. The light rail is very much something that's underway. So as I run out of time here, I just wanted to say that what we at Ecology Ottawa do is very much a volunteer-driven activity, and we're always looking for people who might be interested in engaging. I'm always happy to answer any questions or send them to people who know a lot more than I do, so that they can answer your questions. If you have questions about trees, or the Active City, or a Renewable City campaign, I'd love to put you in touch with those people. And if you ever feel like getting involved, there's always a need for things like for data entry, but there's also a need for things like direct outreach and involvement. Although I see with your Rotary Club schedule, you're already very, very busy. So maybe if you could recommend a friend or something like that who might be interested in engaging. Ecology Ottawa's there waiting for them. And although our office is downtown at 1 Nicholas Street, we are everywhere in the city, or we like to be everywhere in the city. And so, yeah, thank you very much.
I have another issue. Yes. We live by the farm.
Yes.
The farm is never plowed. The sidewalks are never plowed in the wintertime. And yet you see a lot of runners going up and down on the road. Not a safe place. And my husband, who's been lobbying a little bit to try and get them to plow that section of the farm going up to the barns from, anyway, it's just a small issue, but this really makes me want to jump on this to try and get them to plow that. When you see other roads going from Barhaven to on Woodruff, there's a section of a sidewalk is plowed.
Yeah.
Nobody uses it. So anyway, we're so tempted to always buy a little tractor with a plow on it and do it, but for safety reasons or for insurance purposes, we were told that they couldn't plow that section of the farm because of insurance purposes. Well,
I hadn't heard of that before, but thank you.
Yeah, it's so many people are using it. So many runners are using it. Mums with strollers, they would go up and down to go to the barns, but we can't in the wintertime.
Any other questions or comments? Yeah.
You were talking about planting 1 million trees.
Yes.
Is this Ecology Ottawa, or is this like the province, the city, the?
So it is Ecology Ottawa in partnership with a number of different groups. We're spearheading it in the sense that we have the staffer who's running it, and when she runs it, she puts on what we call the Tree Ottawa hat. So Tree Ottawa is a coalition of groups, including partly the City of Ottawa, the Royal Bank of Canada, a bunch of partners from various sectors who are basically, and in terms of, you mentioned the feds and the province, we are asking for funding for 150,000 trees each from both of those levels of government. And so I'm not sure what the status is right now in terms of their level of involvement, but I think that the conversations have been positive so far in terms of them contributing to that 1 million tree vision.
Is this actually planting, or is this like a couple of years ago, if you signed up from seeing something in the paper, you could get a tree to take home and plant in your yard? And so we went out to, it was in the West End, we went out and signed up for our tree, went and picked our tree, took it home, and we had a tree that had died and planted this tree. So is this part of this little initiative, do you think, too?
I know there are a number of different tree initiatives, and I'd have to put you in touch with Velta. Again, Velta's a popular person. She'll have all the details for you. I'm not sure. You know, there's a bunch of very similar. There's some private companies that plant a bunch of trees, and then there's of course the municipal plan that's already in place. But this is a separate initiative. 1 million trees above and beyond the targets that we had when we started this, which is about 2 years ago now. But I don't think they do an adopt a tree thing. We had at one point we had a bunch of extra trees in the office and we just gave them away. But essentially the idea is mobilizing communities around the idea of adopting trees and working with community associations to purchase and plant those trees.
So should I not put her name in the bulletin so that people who are interested?
Oh, she'd be happy. She'd be happy.
Can you give me that so I can put it in the bulletin?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. You want me to give it to you later or right now?
Right now.
Okay, so her name is Velta. So VELTA. Thompson's, and it's spelled so Velta dot TOMSO.
Velta dot.
Yeah.
Sorry. VELTA.
Yeah.
Dot.
TOM.
Capital.
All lowercase.
Okay. Tom.
SONS.
Okay, I wrote TOM.
Yeah. SONS.
SONS.
So Velta dot Thompson's.
Yes.
At Ecology Ottawa, all one word.
Okay, where's my ad? Oh, here. At Ecology Ottawa.
.ca.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
So you must have a website.
We do. Oh yeah. Thank you.
It would be useful to put it in your
EcologyOttawa.ca is our website.
www.
Yeah, and so yeah.
And
or just Google us.
Okay. Where do you get your funding from? You said you're
a variety of sources. So it depends on the project. So in a case like Tree Ottawa, which is very much across a big partnership, there's like I say, the Royal Bank is giving us money. The City of Ottawa gives us a portion of the funds. But we are an independent advocacy organization, and I'd say the majority of our work is entirely independent of the city. So we rely on large institutional donors, grant makers, and we've just recently hired a fundraising developer. So we are trying to ramp up the level of individual fundraising. But in every annual report, we kind of outline where the money's coming from, and it's always more or less the same pie chart if you look at it. It's always grants are the biggest thing, and so if a grant falls through, then that drastically affects our funding. But yeah, we're working on improving the level of individual fundraising. So yeah, but I can forward you a.
No, just curious because with all. We it's the same thing with us. You're always trying to get funding, but when you're an NGO, you're constantly looking for a.
It seems like just at this table, there's a better idea as to where all the money's coming from. I'm just hearing the conversations. I was like, oh, this is impressive. And I often scratch my head and I wonder where the money's going to come.
Bingo.
Yeah, bingo, which is sort of.
Yeah.
Venture for you.
Are you a registered charity?
No, we're not. So we are a not-for-profit organization, and that differentiates us from a lot of charities. So charities will give you a tax receipt, and only I think 10% of their work can be political. as defined by Canada Revenue Agency. In our case, we can be as political or as apolitical as we want to be, but because we are primarily an advocacy organization, we do pressure different levels of government to do different things, and so we very intentionally decided not to be a charity at the outset. Any other questions?
Yeah. Do you have like a sort of partnership or alliance with organizations like this, like in Toronto, like Ecology Toronto? Do you have something like
We
that?
do. So you know, some organizations might come together for a grant proposal, for example, but we do, and we often, because we're part of a small community of environmental groups in Canada, we're friends with and we talk to all the other organizations. But usually the municipal ones are the ones that we're particularly interested in partnering with. So Toronto Environmental Alliance comes to mind, Oakville Green, I think they're called, Reforest London. There are a bunch of municipal level environmental organizations that we don't necessarily do the same thing, but we trade kind of tips and tactics. You know, what does a canvas look like if you're going door to door, or can you help me write this or have an idea for this proposal or whatever for funding.
It's just amazing the damage that the emerald ash bollweed has done. I mean, I run all the trails around here and just in the West End, it's incredible. Just there's nothing you can see right through the river now.
It's astounding. I mean, I was in Frank Ryan Park, where I grew up, just not too far from there, and I was back in Frank Ryan Park in the fall with Ecology Ottawa, and it was so strange walking through the forest that I had spent so much time in as a kid, and it was just
very few trees.
gone. Yeah, it's just amazing.
One more question, but maybe it's only me. So, what's the meaning behind the symbol of Ecology Ottawa?
This is, you know what? You're the second person to ask me that today. So this is apparently a very old symbol, a traditional symbol for ecology. This thing. So you'll actually see other environmental groups use something similar to that. I don't think it's a copyrighted image. But we liked it too because it's an E and an O if you look at it.
Okay.
So maybe we should color it slightly differently, but anyway, that ship has sailed too. So that's our symbol and we're sticking to it. It's kind of like an egg.
I'm thinking like a seed.
Okay.
Well, it's a green Ecology Ottawa.
You can use them all. Seed, green,
yeah.
EO.
Good answers.
Any more questions? Well, Rob, thank you very much for coming out and